They called it the Queen of the Aegean Coast, Ephesus, where marble streets threaded between the facades of public life and the shaded colonnades of private wealth, where the great harbor once bristled with ships and foreign sails. To stand in Ephesus in antiquity was to stand at a crossroads of commerce, culture, and cult, the river feeding out to the sea, the city's agora humming with traders, rhettors, and pilgrims. Above all towered the great temple dedicated to the goddess, not merely a single shrine, but a city-defining presence that shaped Ephesus's identity and drew offerings and envy from across the Mediterranean. The great temple was famed as one of the wonders of the ancient world. Accounts from classical writers and the archaeology that followed paint a picture both of monumental scale and religious centrality. To the visitor approaching Ephesus from the harbor, the temple's marble colonnades and sculpted pediments once glittered like a pledge of prosperity. The rebuilt sanctuary that stood in later centuries measured some 115 by 55 meters, supported by double rows of columns and adorned with votive statuary. Ancient observers wrote of its size and beauty. They recorded the constant stream of worshippers and the market of dedications that congregated around the sanctuary. It was as much a banking house and a social hub as it was a shrine. City wealth flowed through the temple precinct, and the priests wielded civic influence. But the temple's history is one of cycles. Founded, destroyed, rebuilt more than once. Early accounts preserve stories of earlier wooden shrines, of regional rulers who endowed the cult, and of a catastrophic arson in 356 BCE. According to tradition, a deranged servant set fire to the temple on the very night a famous future conqueror was born, seeking immortal fame. The city punished him harshly and sought to bury his name. Yet the story survives, as does the memory of the blaze that led to a magnificent reconstruction funded by contributions from across the region. In time, the temple was again plundered, during invasions in the 3rd century CE, and finally fell into ruin as the provincial economy and the city's shoreline shifted, leaving the once grand sanctuary reduced to a memory embedded in ruins and in numinous local legend. If the great temple defined Ephesus's civic and ritual life, another set of stories folded Christian and later Islamic memory into the city's landscapes, the legend of the 7 sleepers. The tale exists in many medieval versions, Christian, Syriac, Latin, and Islamic, and centers on a group of young men who sought refuge from persecution in a cave outside the city, fell into miraculous sleep, and awoke centuries later into a changed world and a city transformed by the Christian faith. Early Christian martyrologies and hagiographies framed the story as a testament to resurrection and divine protection. The Quran preserves the narrative's central moral in Surah 18, Al-Kahf, though without explicit reference to their number or names. Local topography in the later Byzantine and Ottoman periods often claimed the physical cave as a site of pilgrimage. Travelers' accounts from the medieval and early modern eras describe a cave near Ephesus venerated by both Christians and Muslims, where a modest chapel or mosque marked the spot and people came to seek blessings. The 7 Sleepers story, in its many retellings, served as a bridge between religious communities, and the cave became an emblem of Ephesus's layered heritage, goddess cults, early Christian martyr narratives, and Islamic scriptural memory all overlapping in one landscape. Archaeology has worked to translate these layers into material sequences. Excavations that sparked modern interest in Ephesus began in the 19th century, uncovering the theater and the marble streets, the city's civic centers, libraries and bath complexes slowly yielding up the life of a provincial metropolis. Later systematic work exposed the harbor's decline, the rise of monumental public architecture, and the fragments of the Great Temple. The stones of the sanctuary, reused in other buildings, scattered, buried, testified both to its former glory and to the vicissitudes of time. Walking through the excavated city today, one can sense the interlocking rhythms of belief, power, and daily need. The marble ramp leading to the great library, the stadium's contours, the theater that once held tens of thousands for drama and civic gatherings. These speak to a city that managed display and utility in equal measure. And yet, even among the baths and inscriptions, faint echoes remain of the older religious heart. Votive niches carved into rock, inscriptions naming the goddess and dedications to her, the outline of sacred precincts once vibrant with processions. Ephesus's story is not nostalgic preservation alone, but a lesson in transformation. The temple stones lie in fragments because the city's economic base shifted, because silted harbors turned commerce elsewhere, because deluges of history, our invasions, doctrinal change, and simple neglect remade the human geography. The Seven Sleepers Cave, too, shows how stories migrate and adapt. A once pagan metropolis yields to Christian narratives, which in turn are woven into Islamic memory. Each generation read the city in the light of its own faith and needs, claiming sites, retelling legends, and carving new meanings into ancient stone. Today, Ephesus stands as both archaeological treasure and palimpsest. Visitors trace the lines of marble roads once traversed by traders and pilgrims. Scholars piece together cult practice from fragmentary altars and inscriptions, and storytellers, continuing a tradition as old as the city, recount tales of sleeping saints and goddess-guarded sanctuaries. In those stories, amid the broken capitals and the scattered statuary, Ephesus endures, not merely as a location on a map, but as a living archive of human responses to the sacred, to power, and to the passage of time. Sources: classical and late antique accounts of the region and its sanctuaries. Quran. Surah 18 Al-Kahf, John Turtlewood. Discoveries at Ephesus, 19th century excavation accounts. Publications and reports of the Austrian Archaeological Institute at Ephesus. UNESCO World Heritage Center. Ephesus. Site description and history. Modern archaeological and historical surveys of Ephesus and its monuments.
They call it the House of the Virgin Mary, an unassuming stone dwelling perched on the slopes of Bulbul, MEDIA-MWM mountain, above the ruins of ancient Ephesus, near modern Selçuk in western Turkey. For many visitors, the place reads like a texture of overlapping histories: New Testament tradition, local Anatolian memory, Byzantine cult practice, Ottoman-era coexistence, a 19th century rediscovery, and continuous modern pilgrimage. The result is a site where archaeology, devotional life, and historical ambiguity meet. A long-standing web of tradition underpins the association. The New Testament does not name a location for Mary's death or later life, but it does place the beloved disciple, traditionally identified as John, at the foot of the cross and entrusted with Mary's care, John 19:26-27. Early Christian writers and later pious interpretation situated the Apostle John's ministry in Asia Minor. From this grew local expectations that Mary may have lived in the region under John's guardianship. Over centuries, Anatolian Christian memory preserved the notion that Mary's last years could have been spent somewhere in the Ephesus hinterland. Archaeology and material culture show a long pattern of sacred use on Bulbul Mountain. The extant stone structure and its adjacent chapel are built on remains that date to late antiquity and the Byzantine period. Excavations and architectural study reveal multiple construction phases, restorations, and liturgical fittings consistent with a shrine or small pilgrimage chapel maintained over centuries. Finds of Byzantine ceramics and Christian architectural features indicate the site's significance in the medieval period as a place of local veneration, even if they cannot provide conclusive documentary proof that Mary herself lived. They're the two strands that turn the local shrine into an internationally recognized pilgrimage destination are the visions recorded by the German Roman Catholic mystic Anne Catherine Emmerich and the 19th century investigations inspired by those visions. Emmerich's private visions, published posthumously in the early 1800s, included vivid descriptions of a small house near Ephesus. In 1881, a French priest working near Ephesus, Abbé Julien Gouillet, and later the Lazarist priest Abbé Georgius, found and identified a ruin that matched elements of Emmerich's descriptions. The identification prompted restoration work in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and drew pilgrims from across confessions. As pilgrimage grew, so did official and popular recognition. In the 20th century, the site gained particular prominence when popes and other Christian leaders visited. Pope Paul VI visited in 1967, Pope John Paul II in 1979, and Pope Benedict XVI prayed there in 2006. These papal visits reinforced the house's role as an ecumenical focal point for Marian devotion. Local Muslim communities have historically shown respect for the site as well. In many periods, Muslims and Christians alike regarded the place with reverence, which helped preserve it through Ottoman and Republican eras. Historians and archaeologists treat the House of the Virgin Mary with nuance. The strengths of the identification lie in continuous local veneration, the archaeological evidence for long-term sacred use at the location, and the way the site fits into broader patterns of pilgrimage around Ephesus, itself a major Christian center in late antiquity. The limits are equally clear. There is no contemporaneous documentary record from the 1st century explicitly placing Mary at this particular house, nor physical evidence that can identify a single historical resident as Mary of Nazareth. The connection therefore rests on a mix of ancient local tradition, later devotional amplification, and a 19th century rediscovery that channeled popular piety into modern pilgrimage. The site's meaning today is as much spiritual and cultural as it is archaeological. Pilgrims arrive to pray in a modest interior, to leave ex votos, and to walk the surrounding gardens and forested slopes. The location offers panoramic views over the plain of Ephesus and carries with it the atmosphere of layered time. The ancient ruins below, the medieval chapel remains, the 19th century restorations, and the modern pathways trodden by visitors of many faiths. For many believers, the house is a tangible locus of Mary's presence and intercession. For historians, it is an important example of how sacred memory, local practice, and rediscovery shape pilgrimage landscapes. In short, the House of the Virgin Mary at Selçuk is best understood as an enduring sacred place, formed by cumulative tradition and material continuity. It does not offer incontrovertible proof of a 1st century residence, but it does preserve a continuous thread of devotion that connects early Christian memory, Byzantine cult, and modern ecumenical pilgrimage, a living monument to how place and belief can intertwine across centuries. Key points. Location: Bulbul, Mariam. Mountain: near Selçuk overlooking ancient Ephesus. Tradition: tied to the New Testament motif of the beloved disciple and local lore that places Mary under John's care in Asia Minor. Archaeology: structural and ceramic evidence for late antique and Byzantine phases and continued liturgical use. Rediscovery: 19th century identification inspired by Anne Catherine Emmerich's visions and subsequent restorations. Modern significance: ecumenical pilgrimage site visited by popes and pilgrims, respected by local Christian and Muslim communities.
In the heart of the ancient Near East, the heavens crackled with divine power. This was Baal, the mighty storm god and bringer of life-giving rain. His followers sought his favor to end the drought and bring prosperity. To the people, Baal was the divine king who turned parched earth fertile. Every green sprout was a testament to his role as a provider of life. His legacy is etched in ancient scripts, revealing a culture of deep devotion. Today, the echoes of his thunder remain in the ruins of the past.
Of the ancient worship of Baal in Canaan, a sacred narrative in the ancient lands of Canaan, where the Mediterranean winds swept across fertile valleys and sun-baked hills, there arose a worship that would challenge the faith of nations and echo through the corridors of sacred scripture. This is the story of Baal, the storm god, the lord of rain and fertility, whose altars stood as monuments to humanity's eternal struggle between the divine truth and the seductions of the world. The rise of Baal long before the Israelites crossed the Jordan River. The Canaanites had established a complex pantheon of gods. Among them, Baal stood supreme, his name meaning Lord or Master in the ancient Semitic tongue. He was worshipped as the god who brought the rains, who made the earth fertile, who controlled the very forces of nature upon which survival depended. The Canaanites built high places for Baal, elevated shrines on hilltops and mountains where they believed heaven and earth met. There they erected wooden poles called Asherah, stone pillars and elaborate altars. The worship was sensual, involving ritual prostitution and ecstatic dances, for the people believed that by enacting fertility on earth, they could compel the heavens to make the land fruitful. The confrontation begins when the children of Israel entered the Promised Land. They encountered this seductive worship everywhere. The temptation was powerful. Here was a religion deeply embedded in the culture, promising prosperity and acceptance among their neighbors. Yet the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob demanded exclusive devotion. The Old Testament records this cosmic struggle with unflinching honesty. In the book of Judges, we read, "The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs." Judges 3:7. Time and again, Israel fell into this pattern, abandoning the invisible God who had delivered them from Egypt for the tangible idols of their neighbors. The prophet Jeremiah would later lament, "They have built the high places of Baal to burn their children in the fire as offerings to Baal, something I did not command or mention, nor did it enter my mind." Jeremiah 19:5. The contest on Mount Carmel, the most dramatic confrontation between the worship of Yahweh and Baal, came during the reign of King Ahab, when his Phoenician wife Jezebel promoted Baal worship throughout Israel. The prophet Elijah stood alone against 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. The narrative in 1 Kings 18 is electrifying. Elijah challenged the people. "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." 1 Kings 18:21. 2 altars were prepared. The prophets of Baal cried out from morning until noon, "Baal, answer us." They danced around the altar, cutting themselves with swords and spears, but there was no response. Then Elijah prepared his altar, drenched it with water 3 times, and prayed simply to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. The scripture records, "Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench." 1 Kings 18:38. The people fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." But the prophetic warnings, the prophets of Israel continually warned against Baal worship. Hosea compared Israel's unfaithfulness to an adulterous wife, saying as she said, "I will go after my lovers, who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. But she has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil." Hosea 2:5. 8. The prophet Zephaniah declared God's judgment. "I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all who live in Jerusalem. I will destroy every remnant of Baal worship in this place." Zephaniah 1:4. The Quranic perspective centuries later, the Quran would also address the struggle against idolatry, though it speaks of prophets sent to various peoples. While Baal is mentioned specifically in the context of the prophet Elijah, the Quran emphasizes the universal message against idol worship. In Surah As-Saffat, Allah says, "And indeed Elias was from among the messengers, when he said to his people, 'Will you not fear Allah? Do you call upon Baal and leave the best of creators? Allah your Lord and the Lord of your first forefathers.'" Quran 37, 123, 126. The Quran consistently emphasizes the folly of worshipping created things instead of the Creator. "And they have taken besides Allah gods which create nothing, while they are created, and possess not for themselves any harm or benefit, and possess not power to cause death or life or resurrection." Quran 25:3. The deeper meaning. But why did Baal worship hold such power over the ancient world? It offered immediate, tangible solutions to life's pressing needs: rain for crops, fertility for flocks and families, prosperity in an uncertain world. It required no moral transformation, no surrender of the ego, no wrestling with an invisible God who demanded justice and mercy. The worship of the one true God, by contrast, required faith in the unseen, trust in divine providence, and submission to a moral law that transcended human desire. It demanded that people acknowledge their dependence, not on the forces of nature, but on the Creator of nature itself. The psalmist captured this truth beautifully. "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." Psalm 20:7. The eternal lesson, the struggle between Baal worship and true monotheism, was never merely about ancient religions. It represents the eternal human tendency to create gods in our own image, gods who serve our purposes, who demand nothing difficult, who promise prosperity without transformation. Every age has its Baals, the idols of wealth, power, pleasure, or ideology that promise fulfillment but deliver emptiness. Every generation must choose, as Elijah challenged Israel to choose. Will we serve the God of truth or the gods of our own making? The Old Testament concludes this narrative with the eventual destruction of the high places and the reforms of righteous kings like Josiah, who removed the high places, smashed the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles. 2 Kings 23:14. The Quran reminds believers, "So worship Allah, being sincere to Him in religion. Unquestionably, for Allah is the pure religion." Quran 39:2-3. Conclusion. The ancient worship of Baal in Canaan stands as a testament to humanity's struggle with idolatry, a struggle that continues in different forms today. The scriptures, both the Old Testament and the Quran, call humanity to recognize the one true God, to reject the false promises of idols, and to embrace a faith that transforms not just our rituals, but our very hearts. As Elijah stood alone on Mount Carmel, so each soul must eventually stand before the question, whom will you serve? The answer to that question determines not just the fate of nations, but the destiny of every human heart. In the shadows of ancient Rome, a secret faith flourished among the ranks of the legionaries, hidden from the uninitiated. Bonded by blood and silence, these soldiers sought favor from a god born of stone and light. Inside windowless temples, the initiates gathered to partake in clandestine rituals that transcended the physical world. Every object held a cryptic truth, every flame a bridge to the celestial realms they aimed to reach. Through 7 grades of initiation, they faced trials that tested their loyalty, courage, and very soul. A mystery cult that eventually vanished, leaving only cold stone to guard its eternal sacred secrets.
The Sacred Mysteries of Zerzavan, where ancient Mithraism meets modern intrigue in the rugged highlands of southeastern Turkey, where the Tigris River carves its ancient path through sun-baked stone, stands Zerzavan Castle, a fortress that guards secrets far older and more enigmatic than its 3rd century walls suggest. This remote outpost, perched on a limestone plateau near the modern city of Diyarbakir, has emerged from historical obscurity to become one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 21st century, drawing scholars, archaeologists, and an unexpected procession of global elites to its weathered ramparts. The hidden temple beneath the fortress, for centuries, Zerzavan Castle was known primarily as a Roman military garrison, a frontier stronghold built to defend the empire's eastern borders against Persian incursions. Local shepherds grazed their flocks among its ruins, and the occasional traveler might pause to admire the commanding views across the Mesopotamian plain. But in 2017, excavations led by archaeologists from Deccal University revealed something extraordinary. Beneath the castle's administrative quarters lay one of the best-preserved Mithric temples ever discovered, a subterranean sanctuary where Roman soldiers once gathered to worship the mysterious god. Mithras, the Mithraeum, as such temples are called, follows the classic architectural pattern, a long, narrow chamber carved into bedrock, with raised benches running along both sides, where initiates would recline during ritual meals. At the far end, a relief depicts the religion's central image, the Tauroctony, showing Mithras slaying a cosmic bull, surrounded by symbolic figures including a dog, a serpent, a raven, and a scorpion. Unlike many Mithraic temples damaged by early Christian iconoclasts, Zerzavan's sanctuary remained remarkably intact, its frescoes still bearing traces of ochre and blue pigment, its altar stone still marked with the channels that once carried sacrificial blood. The cult of mysteries Mithraism was perhaps the Roman Empire's most enigmatic religion, a mystery cult that spread through the legions like wildfire during the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. Unlike the public religions of Rome, with their grand temples and civic ceremonies, Mithraism was deliberately secretive, restricted to initiated men who progressed through 7 grades of spiritual advancement. Corax, raven; Nymphus, bridegroom; Miles, soldier; Leo, lion; Persis, Perseon; Heliodromus, sunrunner; and finally Pater, father. What drew Roman soldiers to this Persian-influenced deity? The religion offered something the state cults could not: personal salvation, a promise of immortality earned through moral discipline and esoteric knowledge. The rituals, conducted in darkness, illuminated only by torches and oil lamps, involved symbolic reenactments of Mithras's cosmic deeds, sacred meals of bread and wine, and oaths of brotherhood that bound initiates across the empire's vast distances. Some scholars believe the bull-slaying scene represents astronomical knowledge, a map of the heavens encoding the precession of the equinoxes, with Mithras as the force that moves the cosmos itself. At Zerzavan, the temple's location within a military fortress underscores the religion's martial character. This was not a place for casual worship, but a sanctuary where soldiers sought spiritual fortification before battle, where they forged bonds stronger than blood, and where they participated in mysteries that promised them a place among the stars after death. The archaeological revelation. The discovery of Zerzavan's Mithraism sent ripples through the archaeological community. While over 400 Mithric temples have been identified across the former Roman Empire, most are fragmentary ruins in urban contexts, disturbed by centuries of construction. Zerzavan offered something rare, a complete ritual complex in its original military setting, with auxiliary structures including what appears to be a ritual bath and ceremonial dining halls. Professor Aytaç Koşkun, who led the excavations, described the find as a window into the spiritual life of Rome's frontier soldiers. The site has yielded thousands of artifacts, votive offerings, oil lamps decorated with Mithric symbols, pottery fragments bearing inscriptions in Latin and Greek, and most intriguingly, a series of carved gemstones that may have served as identification tokens for different grades of initiation. But beyond its archaeological value, Zerzavan Castle began to attract attention from an unexpected quarter. As news of the discovery spread through academic journals and then into mainstream media, the remote Turkish fortress found itself on the itinerary of a curious category of visitors: wealthy collectors, esoteric scholars, and members of what might loosely be termed the global elite, individuals whose interest in Mithraism seemed to transcend purely historical curiosity. The modern pilgrims, they arrived discreetly, often in private vehicles with tinted windows, sometimes by helicopter to the nearby town of Çınar. Silicon Valley tech entrepreneurs who have made fortunes in cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence. European aristocrats whose families have maintained private libraries of occult manuscripts for generations. Wealthy Middle Eastern collectors known for acquiring controversial antiquities. American hedge fund managers with a passion for ancient mystery religions. Even the occasional celebrity, their faces hidden behind sunglasses and scarves, seeking something the modern world cannot provide. What draws them to this remote corner of Turkey? Some come as serious students of religious history, drawn by Mithraism's reputation as a thinking person's religion, a system that combined philosophy, astronomy, and ethics in a way that resonates with contemporary seekers disillusioned with conventional faiths. They spend hours in the underground temple, meditating in the same spaces where Roman soldiers once sought enlightenment, trying to decode the symbolic language carved into the stone. Others are motivated by more esoteric interests. Mithraism's secretive nature and its emphasis on hierarchical initiation have long fascinated those attracted to mystery traditions. Conspiracy theorists have noted superficial similarities between Mithric grades and the degrees of Freemasonry, though mainstream historians dismiss any direct connection. Nevertheless, the idea of an ancient wisdom tradition, preserved in underground temples and transmitted through coded symbols, exerts a powerful pull on certain imaginations. There are also those who come seeking what might be called spiritual tourism, the experience of standing in a sacred space, of touching stones touched by hands 2 millennia gone, of feeling a connection to something vast and timeless. In an age of digital distraction and existential uncertainty, these ancient sites offer a tangible link to human beings who grappled with the same fundamental questions. What happens after death? How should one live? What forces govern the cosmos? Through the controversy and the questions, the influx of elite visitors has not been without controversy. Local authorities in Diyarbakir have had to balance the economic benefits of high-end tourism against concerns about the site's preservation. There have been whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, of private tours arranged outside official channels, of substantial donations made to archaeological foundations in exchange for after-hours access, of wealthy collectors inquiring about the possibility of acquiring artifacts. Turkish cultural officials have been careful to maintain that Zerzavan Castle is a protected archaeological site, not a venue for private mystical experiences. Yet the reality is more complex. The The site's remote location makes strict oversight difficult, and the region's economic challenges make the interest of wealthy visitors hard to ignore entirely. More philosophically troubling are questions about cultural appropriation and the commodification of ancient spirituality. Does a Silicon Valley billionaire meditating in a Mithraic temple represent a genuine spiritual seeking, or is it merely another form of consumption, collecting experiences as others collect art? Can the mysteries of an ancient religion, developed within a specific historical and cultural context, be meaningfully accessed by modern individuals whose worldview is fundamentally different? Some scholars argue that this kind of engagement, however imperfect, keeps ancient sites relevant and generates resources for their preservation. Others see it as a troubling pattern in which the wealthy appropriate cultural heritage as a form of spiritual capital, using their resources to access experiences unavailable to ordinary people. The enduring mystery, what remains undeniable, is that Zerzevan Castle and its Mithraic temple continue to exert a strange fascination that transcends academic interest. Perhaps this is because Mithraism, unlike Christianity or Islam, left no scriptures, no systematic theology, no apologetic literature explaining its doctrines to outsiders. Everything we know comes from archaeology and the hostile accounts of early Christian writers. The religion is all question marks and tantalizing fragments, a puzzle that invites projection and speculation. Standing in the underground temple today, one can almost hear the echoes, the chanting of initiates, the crackling of torches, the murmur of prayers in Latin. The stone relief of Mithra slaying the bull seems to gaze out across the centuries, keeping its secrets. What did those Roman soldiers believe they were doing in this chamber? What knowledge did they think they possessed? What transformation did they undergo as they progressed through the 7 grades? We will likely never know with certainty. The mysteries were kept, and they remain kept, locked in stone and silence. Yet perhaps this very uncertainty is what draws people to Zerzevan, the global elites no less than the scholars and the curious tourists. In a world that claims to have explained everything, that reduces mystery to data and spirituality to neuroscience, there is something profoundly attractive about a genuine unknown. Here is a religion that cannot be fully recovered, a wisdom that cannot be downloaded, an experience that cannot be replicated virtually. The future of the past, as excavations continue at Zerzevan Castle, new discoveries emerge each season. Archaeologists have identified what may be a larger temple complex, suggesting that the site's religious significance was even greater than initially thought. There is talk of developing the castle into a major archaeological park, with museums and visitor facilities that would make it accessible to a broader public. But there is also resistance to too much development, a desire to preserve the site's austere, remote character. After all, part of what makes Zerzevan powerful is precisely that it is not easy to reach, that it requires effort and intention to visit. The journey across the harsh Anatolian plateau becomes itself a kind of pilgrimage, a preparation for encountering something that cannot be casually consumed. As for the global elites who continue to make their way to this ancient fortress, their motivations will remain as varied and complex as human nature itself. Some seek knowledge, others seek status, still others seek something they cannot quite name, a sense of connection, perhaps, or meaning or transcendence. Whether they find what they seek in the shadows of the Mithraeum is between them and the silent stone god who has waited there for 1,800 years. What is certain is that Zerzevan Castle, once a forgotten ruin on the edge of empire, has become a crossroads once again, a place where ancient mysteries and modern yearnings meet, where the past refuses to stay buried, and where the questions that haunted Roman soldiers on the Persian frontier still echo in the hearts of those who come seeking answers in the darkness beneath the earth. The god Mithras keeps his secrets still, but the pilgrims keep coming, drawn by something older than empires, deeper than knowledge, and more enduring than stone.